The wind whipped across the tarmac at Teterboro Airport, carrying the heavy mechanical roar of the Bombardier Global 7500's twin engines. Tristan stood with his jaw slack, the aggressive gusts ruining his perfectly coiffed hair and snapping his expensive silk tie over his shoulder. Just 72 hours ago, he had publicly humiliated her in the corporate lobby, tossing a crumpled $10 bill at her scuffed faux leather loafers and loudly advising her to buy a decent cup of coffee. Now, the sleek cabin door opened, the mechanized silver stairs descended, and out stepped Claire. She wasn't carrying the battered canvas tote he had mocked. Flanked by an imposing security detail, she stared down at the man who had just unknowingly lost everything. The offices of Smith & Hayes Financial on the 42nd floor of One World Trade Center were a sanctuary of glass, steel, and hushed, intimidating wealth. Here, the air smelled faintly of expensive cologne and freshly printed prospectuses. It was an environment designed to make the weak feel smaller, and no one embodied that ethos quite like Tristan Smith. As a senior vice president and the nephew of the firm's founding partner, Tristan possessed a brand of arrogance that was both inherited and meticulously cultivated. He wore bespoke Italian suits that cost more than most of his junior analysts made in a month, and an Audemars Piguet Royal Oak flashed on his wrist every time he gestured, which was often. He didn't just walk through the trading floor. He held court. Claire stood by the communal printer, nursing a lukewarm cup of break room coffee. She was 24, brilliant, and completely exhausted. Unlike Tristan, Claire didn't have a safety net, or at least that was the narrative she had carefully constructed and maintained. She wore a sensible, albeit clearly worn, navy blazer from a mid-tier department store, and her dark hair was pulled back in a utilitarian clip. She was a junior associate, running on 4 hours of sleep after compiling a 200-page risk assessment report that Tristan would inevitably skim and take full credit for. "Watch your back, Cinderella," a voice sneered from behind her. Claire turned just as Tristan breezed past, a fresh espresso in his hand. He didn't slow down. In his haste to check a notification on his phone, he clipped Claire's shoulder. The paper cup in her hand crumpled, sending a splash of muddy brown liquid across her blouse and splattering onto the pristine cream-colored wool carpet of the corridor. Tristan stopped. He didn't look at the stain on her blouse. His eyes went immediately to the carpet, then to the scuff marks on her cheap shoes. A slow, mocking smile spread across his face as several other analysts paused, turning their attention to the commotion. "Jesus, Claire," Tristan sighed, shaking his head with exaggerated pity. "If you can't afford to dry clean that tragic polyester jacket, the least you could do is not vandalize the office. Do you have any idea what this carpet costs per square foot?" A few sycophantic chuckles rippled through the gathering crowd of junior brokers. Claire felt the familiar heat of humiliation rise in her cheeks, but she kept her gaze steady. "You walked into me, Tristan." "I walked into you?" Tristan stepped closer, his cologne entirely overpowering the smell of spilled coffee. He looked her up and down, his expression hardening into genuine disgust. "Look at you. You look like you crawled out of a subway grate. You don't belong here. You don't have the pedigree, you don't have the network, and you clearly don't have the wardrobe. You're a charity case HR brought in to fill a quota." "I scored higher on my Series 7 than you did, Tristan," Claire said quietly, her voice devoid of a tremor. The corridor went dead silent. Tristan's smile vanished, his eyes narrowed, turning cold and flat. He reached into his trouser pocket, pulled out a gold money clip, and extracted a crumpled $10 bill. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it. The bill fluttered down, landing directly on Claire's coffee-stained shoe. "Take that," Tristan said, his voice echoing in the quiet hallway. "Buy yourself some stain remover and a lesson in knowing your place. If you're lucky, maybe they'll let you clean the windows instead of the spreadsheets." He turned on his heel and strode toward the corner office, leaving Claire standing in the hallway. The other employees quickly averted their eyes, scurrying back to their desks like frightened mice. Claire didn't move. She looked down at the crumpled bill on her shoe. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. Instead, a strange, profound calm washed over her. She reached down, picked up the $10 bill, and smoothed it out with careful, deliberate fingers. Just 3 more days, she thought to herself. Just 3 more days of playing this game. The subway ride back to Brooklyn was a blur of screeching brakes and flickering fluorescent lights. Claire sat in the corner seat, the coffee stain on her blouse dried into a stiff, dark ring. Her tiny walk-up apartment in Bushwick was a stark contrast to the opulence of the World Trade Center. The heating clanked, the floorboards groaned, and her primary furniture consisted of an IKEA desk and a mattress on the floor. She unlocked her door, tossed her keys onto the counter, and immediately reached for her laptop. Before she could open it, her phone buzzed. It wasn't the standard corporate ringtone she used for Vanguard. It was a private, encrypted line. She swiped the screen. "Hello, Dad." The voice on the other end was deep, gravelly, and accustomed to absolute authority. "Claire, I received the finalized risk assessment from Smith and Hayes today. It's thoroughly comprehensive, almost ruthlessly so." "I wrote every word of it," Claire replied, kicking off her cheap loafers. "Tristan Smith put his name on the cover page, but he doesn't even understand the derivatives section." Stellan Roth chuckled, a sound like grinding stones. Stellan wasn't just wealthy, he was apex wealth. As the founder and sole owner of Roth Industries, a global logistics and energy conglomerate, his net worth hovered around $35 billion. He was a man who moved markets with a casual remark, and Claire was his only daughter, his sole heir. "I know you wrote it, kid," Stellan said, his tone softening slightly. "I know you're formatting. I also know that you spent the last 2 years living in a shoebox, wearing thrift store clothes, and taking orders from trust fund mediocrities just to prove you could survive the trenches without my name." Claire sighed, leaning her head against the cold plaster wall. "It was necessary. I needed to know how the machine actually works on the ground level. I needed to know if I was actually good at this, or if people just agreed with me because I'm a Roth." "And? What's the verdict?" "I'm better than them," Claire said, her eyes drifting to the $10 bill she had placed on her cheap desk. "I'm significantly better than them, but they're blinded by aesthetics. They can't see past the zip code and the clothes." "Tristan Smith in particular, I assume?" Claire paused. Stellan had a network of information that rivaled federal agencies. He likely knew about the altercation in the hallway before Claire even got on the subway. "He made a scene today, spilled coffee on me, told me I was a charity case, and threw a $10 bill at my feet." There was a long, heavy silence on the line. When Stellan spoke again, the fatherly warmth was gone, replaced by the chilling executive presence that made boardrooms tremble. "I see. You know, Smith and Hayes has been lobbying for the Roth Industries asset management contract for 6 months. Tristan is scheduled to fly out to Aspen this Friday to make his final pitch to my board." "I know," Claire said. "He's been bragging about the impending commission all week. He thinks it's a done deal because his uncle played golf with your COO. It's a $5 billion portfolio, Claire. We need a new lead asset manager." "We do." "Are you done playing undercover?" Stellan asked quietly. Claire looked around her cramped, drafty apartment. She looked at the cheap blazer, the scuffed shoes, and the crumpled $10 bill. She had proven her point to herself. The crucible was over. It was time to ascend. "I'm done," Claire said, her voice turning to steel. "Good," Stellan replied. "Because I just informed Smith and Hayes that the pitch location has changed. I won't be in Aspen. I'm flying into New York. The meeting will happen on the tarmac at Teterboro before I fly out to London. Tristan Smith has been instructed to meet my new vice chairman of acquisitions there." "Who is the new vice chairman?" Claire asked, already knowing the answer. "You are," Stellan said. "Pack up your desk, Claire. The jet is waiting." The next morning, Claire walked onto the trading floor of Smith and Hayes exactly at 8 a.m. She wore the same navy blazer, but it had been meticulously cleaned. The air was thick with the usual morning adrenaline, shouting brokers, ringing phones, and the sharp scent of coffee. She walked straight past her cubicle and headed for the glass-walled HR department. The resignation process took exactly 12 minutes. Because she was a junior employee without a non-compete clause, she simply handed over her security badge, her firm-issued laptop, and signed a standard departure form. As she was walking back toward the elevators, carrying only a small cardboard box containing a mug and a few personal notebooks, she heard the heavy footsteps of Tristan Smith. "Well, well, well," Tristan drawled, stepping in front of the elevator doors to block her path. He was wearing a silver-gray Tom Ford suit, looking incredibly pleased with himself. "Word travels fast, Claire. HR says you just pulled the ripcord." "I'm resigning, Tristan," Claire said evenly. "Excuse me." Tristan laughed, a loud braying sound that drew the attention of the nearest desks. "Couldn't hack it, huh?" I told you yesterday. This league is for killers, Claire, not for girls who buy their workwear by the pound. He leaned in, lowering his voice mockingly. What's the plan? Going back to waitressing? Or are you going to try and sue us for a hostile work environment because you couldn't handle a little constructive criticism? I found a better opportunity, Claire said, keeping her face perfectly blank. Oh, I'm sure, Tristan sneered, stepping aside but gesturing dramatically toward the elevator. Best of luck at the local credit union. Try not to spill anything on your way out. Claire stepped into the elevator. As the doors began to close, she looked Tristan dead in the eye. Good luck with the Roth Industries pitch on Friday, Tristan. I hear it's a make-or-break account for your promotion. Tristan's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second, surprised she even knew the specifics of his high-level dealings, but the elevator doors slid shut before he could respond. When Claire stepped out of the World Trade Center and onto the bustling Manhattan sidewalk, a black armored Cadillac Escalade was waiting at the curb. A man in a tailored dark suit stepped out, holding the rear door open. Good morning, Miss Roth, the driver said respectfully. Morning, David, Claire replied, sliding into the plush leather interior. She set her cheap cardboard box on the floorboards. Your father sent some things over to the penthouse, ma'am. He also requested that we stop by the flagship Hermès boutique in the Patek Philippe salon on our way. He mentioned you needed to update your corporate camouflage. Claire leaned back, feeling the tension of the last 2 years finally drain from her shoulders. Let's go home first, David. I need to burn a navy polyester blazer. Over the next 48 hours, Claire Roth was resurrected. She moved out of the Bushwick apartment and into the family's sprawling 2-story penthouse overlooking Central Park. The transformation was swift and absolute. She traded the thrifted clothes for tailored Saint Laurent suits that fit like armor. Her hair was professionally styled into a sleek, commanding cut. The scuffed loafers were replaced by sharp black Louboutin stilettos. On her wrist sat a Patek Philippe Nautilus, a quiet, devastating signal of immense generational wealth. Meanwhile, across the city, Tristan Smith was unraveling with stress. The Roth Industries account was the holy grail. Securing a $5 billion asset management contract would guarantee his elevation to managing partner. His uncle had made it clear, if Tristan lost this deal, his fast-track career was over. On Friday morning, Tristan received the encrypted location change. Stellan Roth was skipping the Aspen Summit. The meeting was happening at Teterboro Airport Terminal 4, the private aviation hub. Tristan was instructed to meet the newly appointed vice chairman of acquisitions, who would make the final call on the contract. Tristan was sweating through his bespoke shirt as his town car navigated the heavy New Jersey traffic. He mentally rehearsed his pitch, clutching his leather portfolio like a life raft. He was prepared to charm, to dazzle, to do whatever it took to impress this mysterious new vice chairman. When Tristan's car finally pulled up to the secured gates of Teterboro, he was immediately escorted onto the tarmac. The morning air was bitterly cold, the wind whipping off the nearby marshlands, and there, gleaming under the pale winter sun, sat the Roth Industries corporate jet, a magnificent custom-painted Bombardier Global 7500. It was a $50 million machine, a flying fortress of absolute power. Tristan stood near the bottom of the air stairs, flanked by 2 stone-faced security contractors wearing earpieces. He nervously adjusted his tie, pasting on his most winning, confident smile. The heavy cabin door of the jet hissed open. Tristan held his breath, ready to greet the executive who held his entire future in their hands. The silver stairs lowered. A pair of black Louboutins stepped onto the top rung. The Bombardier Global 7500 idled on the tarmac, its auxiliary power unit emitting a high-pitched, steady whine that cut through the freezing New Jersey wind. Tristan Smith stood near the base of the air stairs, his knuckles white as he gripped his monogrammed leather portfolio. He had spent the entire car ride meticulously constructing the persona he was about to deploy, the aggressive, brilliant, yet suitably deferential financial prodigy. He was ready to charm the mysterious new vice chairman of acquisitions for Roth Industries. He was ready to secure his legacy. The heavy pressurized cabin door hissed outward and then swung open with a mechanical hum. The mechanized silver stairs extended downward, locking into place with a solid thud. Tristan adjusted his posture, pulling his shoulders back and pasting on a blinding, practiced smile. He watched as a pair of glossy black Christian Louboutin stilettos appeared on the top rung. The sharp metallic click of the heels against the aluminum stairs sounded like the ticking of a very expensive clock. His eyes tracked upward, past the impossibly sharp tailored lines of a midnight blue Saint Laurent pantsuit, past the subtle, devastating gleam of a platinum Patek Philippe Nautilus resting on a slender wrist, past the perfectly styled dark hair sweeping over the collar. When his eyes finally met her face, Tristan's practiced smile did not merely fade, it shattered. The wind abruptly felt 10 degrees colder. His brain, usually quick to calculate margins and pivot in high-pressure negotiations, ground to a violent, stuttering halt. It was Claire. She stood on the middle step looking down at him. The young woman he had tormented for 2 years, the woman he had publicly humiliated just 72 hours ago, the charity case, who bought her clothes at discount stores. Except, she looked nothing like the exhausted junior analyst who used to fetch his coffee. The cheap, shapeless polyester was gone, replaced by an aura of wealth so absolute and uncompromising that it seemed to bend the very air around her. Tristan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. A bizarre, desperate rationalization seized his panicked mind. She got a job here, he thought frantically. She quit the firm to become a flight attendant, or a personal assistant to the Roths. That has to be it. She's fetching their bags. "Claire?" Tristan finally managed to choke out, his voice cracking over the roar of the jet engine. He tried to force a condescending chuckle, though it sounded like a dry heave. "What? What are you doing here? Do you work for the aviation company now?" Claire didn't answer immediately. She descended the final few steps with a terrifying, unhurried grace. As her shoes hit the tarmac, the two massive stone-faced security contractors flanking the stairs immediately stepped forward, forming a protective perimeter around her. One of the men, a giant with a severe military haircut, leaned in slightly. "Perimeter is secure, Miss Roth. The cabin is prepped for your meeting, and the pilots are standing by for your clearance to London." Tristan felt the blood drain from his face, rushing to his feet so fast he swayed on the spot, his vision blurred at the edges. "Miss Roth," the words echoed in his skull, bouncing around like shrapnel. "Miss Roth, the pilots are standing by for your clearance." "Miss Roth." "Thank you, Sullivan," Claire said to the security chief. Her voice was the same pitch, the same timbre he remembered from the trading floor, but the tone was entirely different. Gone was the quiet deference of a junior employee. This was the voice of a predator who had comfortably trapped her prey. She turned her gaze back to Tristan. Her eyes were flat, cold, and entirely devoid of amusement. "Tristan," Claire said. It was not a greeting, it was a summons. Tristan stammered, stepping backward defensively, his expensive leather shoes scraping against the rough asphalt. "I don't understand. I'm here to meet the vice chairman of acquisitions for Roth Industries. There must be some kind of mistake. Stellan Roth requested this meeting." "There is no mistake, Tristan," Claire replied, stepping closer. The scent of her perfume, something bespoke, rich with oud and bergamot, completely overpowered his heavy cologne. "My father is currently over the Atlantic, en route to a summit in Geneva. He entrusted this particular portfolio review to me. I am the new vice chairman of acquisitions." Tristan felt an actual physical wave of nausea wash over him. His stomach clenched violently. He looked at the $50 million private jet, the armed security detail, the impeccable tailoring, and finally, back at the woman he had thrown a crumpled $10 bill at. The jigsaw pieces of the last 2 years violently snapped into place. Her unnatural calm under pressure, her unparalleled grasp of complex derivative markets that had always baffled him. The way she never engaged in office gossip, observing everyone with an analytical detachment. She wasn't a desperate scholarship kid fighting for scraps. She was a billionaire heiress slumming it in his office, taking notes on his incompetence. "You," Tristan breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "You're Claire Roth." "I am," Claire said simply. "And you are 45 minutes late for a $5 billion pitch, Tristan. A pitch you assured your uncle was a guaranteed success." Tristan's heart hammered furiously against his ribs. His uncle, Andrew Smith, the founding partner, was a ruthless man who tolerated zero failure. Andrew had already allocated the projected commissions from the Roth account into the firm's quarterly projections. If Tristan lost this, he wouldn't just be fired, he would be blacklisted from Wall Street. "Claire, look," Tristan started, holding up his hands in a gesture of frantic surrender, his professional facade crumbling entirely. "What happened on Wednesday, in the hallway, It was just hazing. You know how the culture is on the floor. It's high stress. It was a joke. A terrible joke, but a joke. We're colleagues, we're professionals. Claire tilted her head, her expression remaining perfectly blank. Professionals do not assault their subordinates with scalding liquids, Tristan. Professionals do not throw currency at people like they are performing animals. But we are not here to discuss your grotesque lack of character. We are here to discuss a $5 billion asset management contract. She turned toward the stairs of the jet. Bring your portfolio, Tristan. We are going to have our meeting. Let us see if you are as adept at managing my family's money as you are at managing your own arrogance. Tristan swallowed hard, tasting bile. He had no choice. Trembling, he gripped the railing and followed Claire Roth up the stairs and into the belly of the beast. The interior of the Global 7500 was a masterclass in aggressive, understated luxury. There was no gaudy gold plating or velvet. Instead, the cabin was paneled in rare, dark Macassar ebony wood, contrasting with hand-stitched, cream-colored leather seats that looked softer than a cloud. The air was perfectly climate-controlled, and the oppressive roar of the jet engines was muffled to a distant, barely perceptible hum by advanced acoustic insulation. Claire walked past the forward galley, where a private chef stood at attention, and gestured toward the main club seating area. She took a seat in a massive swiveling captain chair, crossing her legs. "Sit," she commanded softly. Tristan practically collapsed into the seat opposite her. The leather enveloped him, but he had never felt more uncomfortable in his life. He placed his leather portfolio on the polished wood table between them, his hands shaking so visibly that the metal clasps rattled against the surface. "Would you like anything to drink, Tristan?" Claire asked, her voice laced with lethal politeness. Coffee, perhaps?" "I promise not to spill it on your Tom Ford suit. I know how much they cost." Tristan squeezed his eyes shut for a fraction of a second, absorbing the brutal psychological blow. No, thank you, Miss Roth." "Miss Roth," Claire repeated, testing the syllables on her tongue. "2 days ago, I was Cinderella and a charity case. You advised me to clean the windows. My, how the paradigm shifts." "Claire, Ms. "Roth, please!" Tristan begged, leaning forward, abandoning all pretense of a formal pitch. Sweat beaded on his forehead, ruining his blowout. "I need this account. You know I need this account. My uncle will ruin me. I was wrong. I was entirely, fundamentally wrong about you. I apologize. I will publicly apologize to the entire firm. I will kneel in the lobby if you want me to. Just, please, don't let personal grievances interfere with business. Smith & Hayes is the best firm to manage this capital." Claire leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. "You assume this is about vengeance, Tristan. It isn't. Vengeance is petty, and it yields no return on investment. This is entirely about business." Tristan blinked, a tiny, desperate spark of hope igniting in his chest. "It is." "Of course," Claire said. "Do you honestly think I spent 2 years living in a drafty Bushwick walk-up, wearing polyester, and eating instant ramen just to play a prank on you? My father and I operate on data. Before Roth Industries commits $5 billion to a new wealth management firm, we audit them. Not just their spreadsheets, but their culture, their ethics, and their junior-level operational competency. We wanted to know who actually does the work at Smith & Hayes and who merely takes the credit." The spark of hope in Tristan's chest was instantly extinguished, replaced by a cold, expanding dread. Claire gestured to the leather portfolio on the table. "Open it." With trembling fingers, Tristan unclasped the portfolio and pulled out the thick, glossy binder containing the pitch. It was the 200-page risk assessment and growth strategy proposal. "Turn to page 47, Claire instructed. "The section on mitigating exposure in emerging market debt." Tristan fumbled with the heavy pages, eventually finding the section. He stared at the complex graphs and dense paragraphs of financial jargon. "Explain the hedging strategy outlined in the 3rd paragraph," Claire said, her eyes boring into him. "Specifically, the utilization of synthetic collateralized debt obligations to offset currency fluctuations in the Southeast Asian energy sector." Tristan stared at the page. The words swam before his eyes. He knew the general concept, but the specifics, the intricate mathematical models required to execute the trade without exposing the core capital to catastrophic risk, were entirely beyond him. He had skimmed this section while hung over at his desk. "Well," Tristan started, clearing his throat nervously. The strategy, it utilizes the synthetic CDOs to create a buffer. By shorting the local currency against the dollar, we insulate the primary assets. Wrong, Claire snapped, her voice cracking like a whip in the quiet cabin. That strategy would expose the portfolio to immense counterparty risk if the local energy sector defaulted. You'd be creating a negative feedback loop that could wipe out 10% of the capital in a single quarter. She leaned forward, tapping a manicured fingernail against the glossy paper of the report. But you don't know that, do you, Tristan? Because you didn't write a single word of this assessment. Tristan swallowed heavily, unable to meet her gaze. I oversaw the team that... I wrote it, Claire interrupted smoothly. I spent 80 hours compiling this data. I built the models, I drafted the risk parameters, and I deliberately inserted 3 catastrophic, hidden flaws in the algorithms on pages 47, 112, and 189. Flaws that any competent senior vice president should have caught during a standard review. Tristan's jaw dropped. He looked at the document as if it were a live grenade. You sabotaged the report? I stress-tested my manager, Claire corrected coldly. And you failed. You took my work, slapped your name on the cover page in a 20-point font, and presented it to the executive committee as your own brilliance. You didn't even read it closely enough to realize it was designed to fail. She paused, letting the silence stretch out, suffocating him. Smith & Hayes is built on a foundation of sand, Tristan, Claire continued, her tone shifting to a terrifying clinical detachment. You promote legacy hires over competent analysts. You foster a toxic culture that prioritizes cruelty over due diligence. If you treat your own analysts with such reckless disregard, how could Roth Industries possibly trust you to safeguard our capital? Tristan was hyperventilating now. The walls of the luxurious cabin felt like they were closing in on him. We can fix it, he pleaded, his voice cracking. I can fix it. I'll put whoever you want in charge of the account. Complete transparency. 0 management fees for the first year. Please, Claire. Claire sighed, a quiet, almost disappointed sound. She reached into the pocket of her tailored jacket. Slowly, deliberately, she withdrew her hand and placed something on the polished Macassar ebony table right next to his fraudulent report. Tristan stared at it. It was a $10 bill, crumpled, worn, and bearing a faint circular brown stain from where it had been pressed into a puddle of spilled coffee. My decision is final, Tristan, Claire said, her voice dropping to a terrifying calm. Smith & Hayes will not be managing our assets. Furthermore, a detailed report of this audit, including your failure to identify the algorithmic flaws in the proposal, has already been sent to your uncle, Andrew Smith, and the firm's board of directors. Tristan grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. She hadn't just denied him the contract, she had systematically detonated his entire career. He was finished. Take your $10, Tristan, Claire whispered, leaning in so close he could see the cold, unyielding amber of her eyes. Buy yourself a bus ticket home and a lesson in knowing your place. Tristan Smith did not remember walking down the mechanized silver air stairs of the Bombardier Global 7500. He moved like a man deep underwater, his limbs heavy and numb, his vision reduced to a narrow spinning tunnel. The freezing New Jersey wind whipped against his face, but he didn't feel the cold. The only thing he could feel was the phantom weight of the crumpled $10 bill he had instinctively shoved into his trouser pocket, right next to his gold money clip. Behind him, the heavy cabin door of the jet hissed shut, sealing away the warmth, the Macassar ebony wood, and the woman who had just systematically dismantled his entire life. Sir, a rough voice barked. Tristan blinked, his focus slowly returning to the bleak tarmac. The giant security contractor, Sullivan, was standing in front of him, pointing a thick, calloused finger toward the terminal gates. The perimeter is closed, Sullivan said, his tone devoid of any of the baseline respect usually afforded to a man in a Tom Ford suit. You need to vacate the tarmac immediately. Your vehicle has been instructed to wait by the secondary fencing. Tristan opened his mouth to argue, to demand a moment to collect himself, but the words died in his throat. The Global 7500's massive twin Rolls-Royce engines roared to life, a deafening, chest-rattling sound that physically forced him backward. He turned and stumbled toward the chain-link gates, his polished leather shoes scraping awkwardly against the rough asphalt. By the time he reached his waiting Lincoln Town car, his phone was vibrating violently in his breast pocket. He didn't need to look at the caller ID to know who it was. The customized ringtone, a sharp, aggressive marimba, belonged to only one person: Andrew Smith, the founding partner of Smith and Hayes, and the uncle who had just been sent a highly detailed, devastating audit of his nephew's incompetence. Tristan slid into the back seat of the town car, his hands shaking so violently he could barely swipe the screen to answer. "Uncle Andrew," Tristan began, his voice breathless and frantic. "Do not speak," Andrew's voice came through the speaker. It wasn't a yell. It was a terrifying guttural rasp, the sound of a man restraining absolute homicidal fury. "Do you have any idea what I'm looking at, Tristan? Do you comprehend the sheer magnitude of the catastrophic liability you have just dumped onto my desk?" "Andrew, please, let me explain. Claire Roth, she was a junior analyst here. She set me up. It was a targeted, malicious sabotage." "Shut your mouth." Andrew roared, the sudden explosion of volume causing the driver to flinch in the front seat. "I'm looking at a 90-page dossier sent directly from the encrypted servers of Roth Industries. It contains not just your failed pitch, but a forensic breakdown of every derivative model you've signed off on for the past 6 months. The algorithmic flaws on page 47, they aren't just mistakes, Tristan. They represent a fundamental violation of SEC compliance regarding synthetic collateralized debt obligations. If we had executed these trades, we wouldn't just lose money. We would be facing a federal investigation." Tristan felt the blood drain entirely from his face. The nausea returned, twisting his stomach into brutal knots. "She wrote it," he whispered, sounding like a frightened child. "I didn't write it. She put the flaws there." "And you put your name on it," Andrew screamed. "You signed the fiduciary declarations. You stood in front of the executive committee on Tuesday and claimed you spent 70 hours personally stress testing those models. Did you even read the damn document, Tristan? Or were you too busy harassing the heiress to a $35 billion empire?" Tristan squeezed his eyes shut. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead, ruining his expensive blowout. How bad is it?" "Roth Industries isn't just pulling the $5 billion contract," Andrew said, his voice dropping back to that lethal, quiet rasp. "Stellan Roth personally carbon copied the heads of Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street on his rejection letter. He cited a profound and systemic failure of basic due diligence and ethical oversight at the senior vice president level. You haven't just lost us our biggest prospective client. You have fundamentally poisoned the Smith and Hayes brand in the global marketplace. We are bleeding institutional credibility by the second." "Uncle Andrew, we can fix this. I can do damage control. I'll take a demotion." "You're not taking a demotion, Tristan. You are taking a cab. The moment you step foot off the elevator, you are to go directly to HR. You will not speak to your analysts. You will not log into your terminal. You are terminated, effective immediately, for gross negligence and violation of corporate conduct." "You can't do this," Tristan shouted, panic finally overriding his deference. "I'm family. You can't just throw me to the wolves." "Family?" Andrew let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You arrogant, stupid boy. In this industry, the only blood that matters is the quarterly yield. You cost me $5 billion today. If I could legally throw you out the 42nd floor window, I would. Have your desk cleared in 15 minutes." The line went dead. The ride back to Manhattan was the longest hour of Tristan's life. The Lincoln Town car crept through the Lincoln Tunnel traffic, every brake light a burning red reminder of his impending execution. He stared out the tinted window, watching the jagged, glittering skyline of New York approach. Just that morning, he had felt like he owned the city. Now, it looked like a fortress with its gates locked against him. When he finally walked into the soaring glass lobby of One World Trade Center, the atmosphere had already fundamentally shifted. The security guards, who usually offered him a deferential nod, barely looked at him. The receptionist didn't smile. The corporate ecosystem has an uncanny ability to smell blood in the water, and Tristan was hemorrhaging. He rode the elevator up to the 42nd floor in total silence. When the silver doors parted, he stepped onto the trading floor. It was a slaughterhouse disguised as a financial institution. Every phone was ringing. Junior analysts were running between desks, clutching printouts, their faces pale. The senior partners were huddled in the glass-walled conference room, gesturing wildly at a monitor displaying the firm's plummeting internal valuation metrics. Word had leaked. The street knew Roth Industries had publicly blackballed them. Tristan walked down the main aisle toward his corner office. He tried to keep his chin up, tried to project the arrogant armor he had worn for years, but his posture was shattered. He was a ghost walking through a graveyard he had dug himself. As he passed the communal printer, the exact spot where he had spilled coffee on Claire just days prior, he noticed a cluster of junior analysts staring at him. Among them was Sarah, a brilliant but timid girl who sat at the desk next to where Claire used to work. Sarah didn't look away when Tristan met her eye. There was no fear in her gaze anymore, only a cold, quiet satisfaction. Tristan reached his corner office. Waiting at his door were two burly security guards in dark suits, holding a flattened, standard-issue cardboard box. "Mr. Smith," the taller guard said, his voice flat, "HR has requested we supervise your packing, personal items only, no hard drives, no client files, no firm-issued electronics." Tristan swallowed hard. "I know the protocol." He walked into his office. The panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline seemed to mock him. He assembled the cheap cardboard box, his trembling hands struggling with the flaps. He packed his framed degree from Wharton. He packed his crystal decanter. He packed his silver fountain pen. When he reached into his pocket to grab his keys, his fingers brushed against the crumpled $10 bill. He pulled it out, staring at the brown coffee stain marring Alexander Hamilton's face. It was the cheapest thing he had ever owned, and it had cost him absolutely everything. He placed the bill at the bottom of the cardboard box. Under the watchful eyes of security and the silent, judging stares of the 50 analysts he had tormented for years, Tristan Smith carried his box out of the glass doors of Smith & Hayes. He didn't look back. There was nothing left to look at. 3 months later, the financial landscape of Wall Street had shifted entirely, though the casual observer wouldn't know it. The glass towers still gleamed, the subways still rumbled, and the coffee still spilled on the bustling sidewalks. But in the rarefied air of high-tier asset management, a tectonic plate had cracked, and Claire Roth was the one holding the hammer. Claire sat at the head of a massive polished oak conference table in the London headquarters of Roth Industries. The room was silent save for the quiet hum of the climate control and the occasional scratching of a pen. To her right sat her father, Stellan Roth, watching her with a mixture of quiet pride and absolute terrifying intensity. Spread out on the table before her was the finalized acquisition portfolio. "The numbers are verified, Claire," said David Hastings, the Roth Industries chief financial officer. He tapped a sleek tablet. In the wake of the Roth withdrawal and the subsequent SEC audit regarding their derivative models, Smith & Hayes saw a 40% drop in their managed assets. Clients panicked. The firm's valuation plummeted into distressed territory. They were bleeding capital so fast they couldn't cover their quarterly leverage. "And Andrew Smith?" Claire asked, her voice calm, devoid of any vindictive edge. It was purely business. "Andrew tried to find a white knight to buy them out, but major players like Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley wouldn't touch them. The internal culture was too toxic, the liability too high," David explained, leaning back. "Which allowed us to move through our shadow shell companies. We've aggressively purchased their outstanding debt and secured a controlling 62% stake in their voting shares." Stellan Roth steepled his fingers, his gravelly voice cutting through the room. "You've bought the firm that treated you like a peasant, Claire. The question is, what do you intend to do with a sinking ship?" Claire looked at her father. She wore a tailored slate-gray Alexander McQueen suit, her Patek Philippe catching the overhead light. "It's only a sinking ship because the captain was drilling holes in the hull to sell the wood," she said smoothly. "Smith & Hayes has an incredibly robust infrastructure and a roster of brilliant, overworked junior analysts who were never allowed to thrive because they were suffocated by nepotism and legacy hires. The foundation is solid. We just need to demolish the penthouse." She stood up, gathering her files. "Draft the final press release, David. I'm flying back to New York tonight. It's time to clean house." 48 hours later, the atmosphere at One World Trade Center was electric with a terrified, buzzing anticipation. The remaining employees of Smith & Hayes had been informed of a mandatory all-hands meeting in the main trading floor atrium. Rumors had been swirling for days about a hostile takeover, about mass layoffs, about the firm being dissolved entirely and sold for parts. Andrew Smith stood near the front of the room, looking visibly aged. His bespoke suit hung slightly loose on his frame. He had lost the company his grandfather built, forced into a humiliating buyout just to keep himself out of federal prison. He didn't know who the proxy buyers were. The entire acquisition had been handled through aggressive, anonymous corporate machinations. At exactly 9 a.m., the heavy glass doors of the lobby swung open. A team of corporate lawyers entered first, followed by Sullivan and the imposing security detail from the tarmac. The chatter on the trading floor died instantly, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. And then, Claire walked in. She didn't wear a navy polyester blazer. She wore power incarnate. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the cream-colored wool carpet, the same carpet she had been accused of vandalizing. She walked with the unhurried, predatory grace of someone who owned every atom of oxygen in the room. A collective gasp rippled through the junior analysts. Sarah, standing near the back, covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with shock. Andrew Smith's jaw dropped, his face turning an ashen, sickly gray. He recognized her from the security footage of the hallway incident, the footage that had been thoroughly reviewed during the HR fallout. Claire walked straight to the podium set up in the center of the room. She didn't adjust the microphone. She simply looked out over the sea of faces, her gaze sharp and calculating. "Good morning," Claire's voice echoed through the massive room, cool and resonant. "For those of you who do not know me, my name is Claire Roth. I'm the vice chairman of acquisitions for Roth Industries. As of 8 a.m. this morning, Roth Industries is the sole majority shareholder of this firm. Welcome to Roth Smith Capital." The silence was so absolute it was deafening. Claire turned her gaze directly to Andrew Smith, who looked as though he might collapse. "Mr. Smith, your services as managing partner are no longer required. A severance package commensurate with your gross mismanagement of this firm has been wired to your accounts. Security will escort you out." Andrew didn't argue. He didn't scream. The fight had been entirely drained from him. He simply lowered his head and allowed Sullivan to guide him toward the elevators, an echoing repetition of his nephew's humiliating departure 3 months prior. Claire turned back to the crowd. Her eyes softened just a fraction as she looked at the rows of exhausted, brilliant young analysts who had survived the crucible of the old regime. "For the past 2 years, I sat at a desk in the bullpen," Claire said, her voice carrying a profound, quiet authority. "I drank the terrible break-room coffee. I worked the 80-hour weeks. I saw who built the financial models, and I saw who stole the credit. That era ends today," she gestured toward the group of junior staff. "This firm will no longer operate on pedigree, zip codes, or the price tag of your suits. We will operate on merit, data, and relentless innovation. Those of you who have done the actual work will be promoted. Those of you who have coasted on legacy will be replaced." "Sarah," Claire paused, looking directly at the young woman. "My office, in 20 minutes. We need to discuss your promotion to Senior Vice President of Emerging Markets." Sarah blinked back tears, nodding rapidly. The trading floor erupted into stunned, hesitant applause, which quickly crescendoed into a deafening roar of genuine relief and triumph. Claire Roth hadn't just bought the firm, she had liberated it. Meanwhile, 40 blocks north, the world looked very different. Tristan Smith sat in a cramped, greasy diner in Hell's Kitchen. The air smelled of stale frying oil and burnt coffee. He wore a faded, off-the-rack gray suit that didn't fit him properly, his hair unstyled and dull. The Audemars Piguet was gone, sold to pay the retainer for the defense attorneys handling his ongoing SIC investigation. His luxury apartment was gone, liquidated to cover his mounting debts after being thoroughly blacklisted from every major financial institution on the eastern seaboard. He was currently employed as a junior customer service representative at a mid-tier retail bank in Queens, answering phones and helping elderly clients reset their online banking passwords. It was a humiliating, soul-crushing existence, a brutal daily reminder of the heights from which he had fallen. Tristan stared blankly at the tepid cup of black coffee in front of him. Above the counter, a small, dusty television was tuned to Bloomberg News. "Breaking news this morning from the financial sector." The anchor's voice drifted through the din of clattering plates. "Roth Industries has officially completed a hostile takeover of the distressed asset management firm, Smith & Hayes, rebranding it as Roth Smith Capital." Tristan's head snapped up, his eyes locked onto the screen. The television showed live footage of the New York Stock Exchange. Standing on the iconic balcony, surrounded by cheering traders and a newly appointed diverse board of directors, was Claire Roth. She looked magnificent, untouchable, ringing the opening bell with a confident, blinding smile. The chyron beneath her read, Claire Roth, the new apex predator of Wall Street. Tristan felt a cold, hollow ache expand in his chest. He looked at the television, and then he looked down at the table. Sitting next to his cold coffee, perfectly smoothed out, was the $10 bill. He carried it with him everywhere now. It wasn't just a piece of currency anymore. It was a monument to his arrogance. A daily, agonizing reminder that he hadn't just mocked a girl for being poor, he had mocked the architect of his own destruction. He picked up the bill, left it on the table to pay for his cheap coffee, and walked out into the cold, unforgiving rain. The story of Tristan and Claire serves as a sharp modern parable about the blinding nature of arrogance and the quiet, devastating power of true competence. Tristan Smith constructed his identity around the superficial markers of wealth, the tailored suits, the expensive watches, the cruelty disguised as corporate culture. He believed that power was something worn, not earned. Claire Roth, conversely, understood that true power is entirely independent of aesthetics. By stripping away her billionaire armor, she didn't diminish herself. She exposed the rot within Tristan's world. Her ultimate victory wasn't merely personal revenge. It was a systemic cleansing, proving that while inherited privilege can buy a corner office, it cannot buy the intellect and resilience required to keep it. In the end, Tristan's downfall wasn't caused by a $10 bill, but by his fundamental inability to recognize worth when it wasn't dressed in silk.